Deputy Pringle.
Thank you, Ciara. Minister, I wish to indicate that I would be supportive of this legislation being brought before the House tonight, an emergency legislation arising from the court case and the judgment in the Court of Appeal earlier on today. And it goes back to, I suppose, the head shops and the legal highs, or so-called legal highs, that were being sold through head shops. And I campaigned in Donegal against head shops and marched in Donegal town against those head shops back in 2010. And at that time, many communities right across the country were delighted when the government moved and prescribed the substances that are being sold as legal highs within the head shops through the legislation, or the SI as it was then in 2010, that actually made them illegal and effectively ended the head shop trade, which I think was a very progressive move and the right move to make it at the time for the state, and supported many communities across the country. But the judgment today, I suppose, throws all of that into doubt, and as also has been said by yourself publicly today, effectively all these substances, possession of them is now legal up until this legislation can be passed. And it arises from the Section 2 of the Misuse of Drugs Act 1977, where in the judgment today stated that it was repugnant to Article 15.2.1 of the Constitution and is therefore invalid. Article 15.2.1 states that the sole and exclusive power of making laws for the state is hereby vested in the Oireachtas. No other legislative authority has power to make laws for the state. But most importantly as well, the judgment noted that Section 2 left out the important policy judgments, and leaving Section 2 to be interpreted by the government and not by the Oireachtas. And the judgment noted that no principles or policies regarding the nature of the substances, product or preparations can be declared by order to be controlled drugs are contained in the section itself. And I think that's probably the key point in relation to the judgment. And the judgment affirmed that such bodies, such as the department itself, are not lawmakers, and they put into execution the laws as made by the governing authority. So the important aspect is that the policy and the principles is neglected within the primary legislation that gives the direction to the department in making these declarations in terms of these substances. And I think that is a key point. And what this legislation does tonight is provides for the legalisation of the banning of substances that has already taken place up until today. And I think everybody welcomes that, to ensure that order is given back to that system again. But I think we have to look as well to what happens between now, and I know you've said that you're going to bring forward primary legislation that will actually provide those principles and policies and legislation that will allow for the statutory instruments to be implemented into the future. But it brings into question just the government's reliance on secondary legislation as well, and the lack of scrutiny in relation to secondary legislation, and how so much of our laws seem to be actually done in that way, and quite a lot of stuff can happen through statutory instruments that maybe wasn't scrutinised or wasn't intended in terms of the Oireachtas as well. And during the evidence, I think, in the case as well, the chief pharmacist of the department said it would be cumbersome to assume that any such new drug product deemed dangerous were only banned by legislation subsequently enacted by the Oireachtas. But that actually is a constitutional position, and in light of the fact that we haven't got the policies and principles laid out in primary legislation. So I don't think it's enough for the department to say that it's cumbersome. I think we need to have a position where we can, by resolution of the House of the Oireachtas here, or passing of a resolution here, can actually add substances onto the list. And I have put forward an amendment which will be taken shortly in the committee stage in relation to just that, because I'm concerned about what happens from tonight on, and when the primary legislation has been drafted. It's going to take some time, and indeed you've said yourself that it's quite technical and detailed in actually drafting that legislation, so it's going to take time for that to be brought before the Houses here and pass through the House. And indeed you'd wonder maybe even whether it could possibly be done before the election, or be done in the lifetime of this government. So I think we have to have some sort sort of system where if substances, as Deputy O'Sullivan has pointed out, substances keep coming on the market constantly all the time. So we need a system between now and the passing of the primary legislation to allow substances to be continued to be prescribed. And I think that's why I put forward an amendment that the Oireachtas would pass to ensure that the substances can be added to the list. So I think that's vitally important, and we look at that as well.